time for Type 40, your Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network, with me, Dan Hadley, Birmingham's King of the Geeks and designated driver. If this is your first trip of a lifetime with us, or you've been aboard before, it falls to me to confirm we're an eclectic, eccentric, freewheeling but big-thinking show for everybody. Whatever decade or century you started watching, reading or listening along to the ongoing adventures of our hero, Doctor Who, we talk about it all on this show. All views are encouraged, and we'll even try and throw in a few laughs along the way. Just hold tight and everything will be fine when you step into our TARDIS and share this journey together here with us on Type 40. Yes, and whether you're in N-Space or E-Space, you're welcome to this particular edition of the show. The entire Whoniverse is ours to roam, and this time I'm very much Adric to the figure of the Doctor, as embodied by my good friend Simon Horton.
Well, you're Adric, are you? Well, you know, that's brave, Dan. That's very brave.
Well, you're the one with the burgundy scarf.
I am. I should be wearing it, shouldn't I? I should be wearing my burgundy scarf today for reasons that will become apparent. Really need that burgundy scarf.
This is a special edition of the show, isn't it? Special in more ways than one. I don't think I ever believed that we would be having the conversation that we're about to bring to you. Now, it's almost like it comes from another dimension. You're not going to believe your ears. But Simon, when I told you that this was even possible,
yeah,
you were just delighted. You couldn't wait to get started.
Yeah, no, I leapt on this one very, very excitedly. As soon as we kind of sort of bandied this one around as a possibility, I was straight there. It's this is something that I honestly think if my 12-year-old self back in 1981 would be having the kind of conversation that we are about to have, I just, I don't think I would have believed myself, because this is nirvana for me. This is.
Yes, it's that good, everybody, because we spend all of time and space, don't we, talking about the present, the future, and the past of Doctor Who. We clock it all. We clock the mechanics of it as a piece of entertainment. But what we wanted to get to the bottom of here was how it may feel to have contributed to all of that, to have played in that sandpit, if you like, as part of a career and a creative pathway. Where does it ultimately land, sort of in context with the rest of it? But this time Simon and I are joined by photographer, artist, writer and filmmaker Paul Joyce. Now, Paul was responsible in 1980 for 4 of the most visually arresting episodes in Doctor Who's entire history, and they still beguile and provoke us viewers all these decades on, don't they, Simon?
Oh, they do, and they still cause controversy within fandom. People still talk about it. The truth of it is, Warriors Gate is a story that's never ever been forgotten by the fans. No. I suppose maybe we could sort of say it's a kind of a love it or loathe it sort of story. I don't know. It's certainly something that I love and loved ever since I first saw it, as I say, as a 12-year-old in 1981, and I didn't get it. I didn't understand it, but that didn't matter, because for me, this Warriors Gate I saw at exactly the same point in my life, really. I fell in love with 2001: A Space Odyssey as a 12-year-old, and I didn't understand that either. And so for me, Warriors Gate is very much the kind of 2001 of Doctor Who. For me, it doesn't matter that you don't necessarily understand it. It's about the package as a whole. As you say, beguiling is the perfect word for it, really. It's about the imagery, it's about the set pieces, it's about the characters, it's about the thoughts that it just sets up in your brain. It gets you thinking in the way that a lot of television doesn't do. A lot of Doctor Who stories don't necessarily do. They work on one dimension.
As
on
much
one
as
level.
as much as we love them. So yes, Paul Joyce was
Yeah.
the director of these 4 episodes that made up the 5th story in season 18 of Doctor Who, Warriors Gate. But it is just one chapter of a creative story that's about to be celebrated in a retrospective of his work, which includes photographing famous faces, as well as his own paintings and various portfolios and collections. But before we get into all of that, I have to remind you that each and every edition of our show, past, present, and future, is just a tap or 2 away on the device of your choice if you know where to look. And there'll be some more about that a little bit later on, as well as a cut across to the matrix of all knowledge that we call the Fandom Podcast Network for a word about all the other cult conversations across all those other fictional universes that we love spending time in so much on the podcasts over there. Just one more thing, everybody. I must advise there's some colourful language in our conversation that may not be suitable for younger viewers. Now, though, I think that we're as ready as we'll ever be, Simon, to meet a real enigma in the history of Doctor Who, a real one-off. It's the one and only Mr. Paul Joyce.
Lovely to be with you.
So Paul, I've just rewatched Warriors Gate over the last week or so for the umpteenth time in preparation for us speaking, and I found it as curious and as captivating as ever. But when did you last watch it yourself, and do you revisit your old material very often?
I watched it last right through at the final edit in probably 1980.
What? You've never seen it since?
I have a Blu-ray recorder and I've never used it, and I haven't watched it, but I understand it looks all right. I mean, my great regret was it took them about 20 years to put it out on VHS. You couldn't see it. It just disappeared. Then it went on to DVD. But at no point was I ever invited in to supervise. I mean, we did a director's commentary for the first DVD. Then nothing. And there are special effects and things and sounds and all sorts that I could tidy up if I was given the chance, you know. Well, if you're Martin Scorsese. Oh, Marty, come in. Yes, yes. Oh, you don't like that? Yeah, okay. Oh, no. A bit louder for Marty. Paul Joyce, get out.
And it's such a shame because the material all exists there, and all of the film rushes still exist for all the special effects. So you could definitely go back in. Would you? Do you think if you were to come in and say do a director's cut on Warriors Gate now, if you were to look at it again now, because you obviously can't shoot new material, do you think you would be able to shape a different product from the existing material?
I think probably the shape is more or less dictated by the dramatic narrative, you know. I mean, it would be nice to shoot some new material, but there's one effect which is the spinning coin in the Warriors Game. And I said I want it to go up and to slow down. You know, we're in a different time zone. Things happen differently here. Zoom, and freeze. Lovely. I want you to take that and do it again. And you zoom in further. Well, we can do that, yes. But you'll begin to see the breakdown of the image. And I realized at that point that when you started to see individual pixels, it was as if the world was being seen through different eyes. Perfect. Oh, it doesn't look real. It doesn't. That doesn't mean to. It shouldn't look real.
It's hyper real.
Hyper real, surreal. It's a different universe. We're somewhere outside of ordinary time and space.
Yeah.
Now, either you understand that without sitting down like this for 10 minutes saying what we're doing. We're in an edit situation where you have to do something and move on, you know. Now, that's like a concrete example and also a metaphor for what I faced with this.
With the production.
with every aspect of the production.
It sounds like you fought at every turn on this production.
I fought at every turn. And people said you looked exhausted, you were fired, you had a mental... Didn't have all that. It was just I was under enormous pressure all the time. But I'm pretty strong and I kept going, Yes, I was fired, I think 3 times one day, John Nathan. On the third occasion, it was clear that the firing was a kind of slap on the wrist rather than
Gotcha. Yeah.
He told me to get out of the control room, at some point. And I'd left my bag, so I was able to get back in. I think I left my bag, John. Oh, you come in. You better sit down then. So I was rehired.
And it was all forgotten again. But I mean, it's fantastic that firstly, that you had the strength of character to stick with it, because a lot of people would have crumpled under that kind of pressure.
They wanted me to crumple. They wanted me to crumple. I had the same thing with the film on 4 in Ireland, where I had a really vicious producer, and they want that the same thing happened. It was called Summer Lightning with Paul Schofield. They wanted me to fail. They hate, I'm an English Protestant sort of aristocratic representative coming into RTE,
And exactly the same thing happened by the sounds of it at the BBC, where you were coming in. I think you were coming in from an auteur perspective.
Always. Yeah, that was it.
And the BBC were coming from the old style studio system that they'd run for decades, and literally you banged heads, didn't you?
Loggerheads right away.
Yeah, you see, there's been some controversy about the role that Graham Harper, who went on to direct other, considerable talent, no question about it. He didn't direct anything without my approval. There was a time on the floor where when I was in the box and he was on the floor, I said, look, you've got to get the MZ coming out of, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Just, you know what to do, because I'm doing this. And he's always said that he didn't direct anything himself, but he has said that he learned a great deal from me during that experience. And I think he did. But there was if you look back at Graham Harper, he kind of made tea on Let's Be a Vet, or whatever that bloody series was.
All Creatures Great and Small.
All Creatures Great and Small.
I prefer Let's Be a Vet.
I prefer mine. He all the way up to direct. That's what they want. Because you're controlled. Oh, Graham, okay, now you did very well. Now you can do this. Now you can help Paul on that, and then we might give you a slot. And what you end up with then is somebody who takes this, gratefully takes a script, albeit bollocks, and does it. That's all they want. Just here you are. Just don't give a shit. Just do it. And do it in time and without a fuss, and that's it. Well, they didn't give me a script. They gave me a treatment. It's about huge controversy. Steve Gallagher says, I'd written, 8 drafts and
Could you explain for us, Paul, what is the difference for the people out there who don't know? What do you see as the main difference between a treatment and a full script?
Well, a treatment is like, if you're submitting a novel to a publisher, you'd probably submit the first chapter and a synopsis.
Oh, yeah.
The synopsis being the story beyond the first chapter. That's basically a treatment. And then the TARDIS arrives in this space, and there's a bit of a thing, and the Gundam comes, and
a breakdown of what will happen in what order.
That's it. No dialogue, just an indication of the movement of the story. Because you want to see, particularly with a Doctor Who, which is 4 parts, you've got to find an ending that's going to bring people back to the next episode.
Yeah.
None of that was in Gallagher's. It was just a storyline. An
almost
expanded
a
storyline.
stream of consciousness thing where he just gone, then this happens, then that happens,
it
rather than
was-
a practical
I mean, he
script
thought
that
the
you could work
story
from.
through. He hadn't really thought about the getting rid of Romana and K9. At that point, I said to Chris Bidmead, who was the best script editor I'd ever worked with anywhere, what do we you know, I can't.
You've got no script.
What do we get? Oh, okay. So they cancelled the first week of. I lost a week of rehearsals.
Yeah.
They didn't
Whole
give.
week.
They didn't. They didn't give me another week. You know, it's like when they closed the set because they said it was dangerous. Lost 2 or 3 days. Never got it back.
I wondered, Paul, if that, because there's a lot of urban myths, I think, that have built up, not just around the story itself, because it is very mysterious. It is very multi-layered, but around the production too. There are all sorts of things about that the set was condemned, that yourself, you know, that you were fired, or that other people, other personnel may have done this or may have done that. There are so many myths out there about this, about just these 4 episodes of television. Is that something that surprised you?
Well, yeah, obviously it surprised me. What I have to say about it, though, is that I think it justifies how I went in. When I went in with John Carpenter here, and Stanley Kubrick here, and Robert Aldrich there. You know, there they were, all hovering around me, and in I went.
Spirit guides. Yeah.
Yes. And I said, and we showed, we went, there was a viewing theatre. We ran 2001, we ran Dark Star, we ran Kiss Me Deadly. This will give you an idea of what I'm trying to achieve. So there was no pretending. I wasn't pretending that auteurism didn't exist. I went in fully transparent. We want to do something which takes the form and contorts it and twists it and makes it something interesting, which is the nature of the show anyway.
So out of interest, had you seen Doctor Who at that point, and did you know that you were deliberately going in to distort and bring in a new sensibility?
Well, we'd all seen William Hartnell, wandering around in black and white, and, no, I wasn't a huge fan of Doctor Who.
I mean, were you aware that the BBC studio system worked as it did, and you were deliberately going in to do something different, or was it a surprise to you to discover, what you want to do?
No, I knew about the BBC system. I knew an elderly producer there called Rosemary Hill, who was apparently very sympathetic to me, but never employed me. All she wanted was a drinking companion, so I went in and got pissed in the bar with her. And she never gave me anything to do. She gave it all to a director called Peter Hammond. I knew the system very well. I walked the corridors of the BBC, but I was always an outsider. I mean, if I got in there, the facilities within the BBC, the departments like Matt Irvin, imagine going to him and saying, look, I've got a whole program. Let's start from scratch and work out how we can do the special effects on this. They didn't want me in there. I would have been, for them, a malign influence, because I would have contorted the system and made it do something, like the War Game. I'm not comparing myself with him. It's a great, and Culloden, his documentaries, wonderful. I'm not comparing myself to them. I'm just saying he can't get arrested.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because certainly the visual side of Warrior's Gate is absolutely up there as one of the most, if not the most, visual Doctor Who stories, certainly up until that point. Where were your sensibilities working? What was more important to you? Was it the narrative, or was it the visual, or do you think it was the meshing of the two?
It was the meshing of the two. I remember when I was doing 2 books with David Hockney and spending a lot of time with him, I was in his studio in LA, and he said, "We make images here. That's what we do. We're an image factory." And that's how I think, really, through images. I'm always chasing the light, or thinking, You know, my note to amateur photographers is always, as the day ends, chase the light, because you'll get the best image. And in a sense, I'm always chasing the light. An example of that would be where I brought the studio to a halt by shooting off set, because there was the perfect structure for a badly made spaceship.
Were you aware you were going to run into problems by trying to do that, and you didn't care? Or
no, I if I'd thought it through, you know, you're going to have 6 months or 6 weeks of hell. You're going to be fired. You're going to crawl home at the end of the. I probably would have said yes, okay. Yeah. Now, Graham Hart.
You must have a very thick skin. You must have a very thick skin, Paul.
Well, what do you think?
Because, of course, there's always this controversy over the camera scripts, these missing camera scripts.
Fucking camera scripts. The only reason for a camera script in the BBC is for the fourth Dalek. I mean, when I say Dalek, the cameras were Daleks, basically.
Yeah.
And and the cameraman usually talked a bit like Daleks, you know.
And so
the cameraman 4 on the corner of the table, would know that at that moment he has to get the axe going in.
Yeah,
that's it, and it's down there in black and white. Whereas I don't give a shit about cameraman 4 and the axe going in. If I've got a handheld camera there, I'll shoot it that way. Yeah. Oh yeah, but that's outside. So the camera script wasn't something that I couldn't do. It was something I didn't want to do. Didn't want to address.
Just seemed flat somehow. It just seemed flat to you compared to the way you were relating to the material and how you saw the vision for it. Those images that you described. You're led by imagery.
Well, yeah. I mean,
something more visceral.
Yeah, you're led by that, and of course you want to find tools which are going to unlock those possibilities. And one of those was the Ikegami camera,
Mm-hmm. It was the first time it was used on Doctor Who, that was, as far as I understand. Can you remember, Paul, at what point did kind of the penny drop, as it were, and you realised, okay, this is going to be a hard slog? So was it on your first day in the production office? Was it when you were doing the rewrites? Was it the start of rehearsals, the studio day? At what point did you think, wow, this is going to be tough?
Well, from the moment you wake up. Yeah, I mean, all those and more. All those and more. I mean, your point about the penny is quite interesting, because the penny didn't drop; it stayed in the air and froze.
It's still there.
That's right. Yes, but it's going to be a bad day.
But it's interesting.
Yes, it is.
It's interesting because that opening sequence, that opening shot of episode 1, is truly, I think, one of the most bravura 2 minutes of television of Doctor Who. Period. I remember I watched Warriors Gate as an 11-year-old.
Yeah.
And was blown away by it. No, I didn't understand it, but I was blown away by the visual style of it, the panache, the confidence, the experimental style of it. And that opening sequence still blows me away to this day, because it's like nothing you have ever seen before or since on Doctor Who. So you were really, really pushing the envelope, weren't you, with that visual style, and to bring something deliberately different to Doctor Who. Yes. That must have been forefront for you.
Well, that came from a film vocabulary and knowledge.
Yeah.
Touch of Evil, which is the greatest opening of, and probably Wells's greatest film, I think.
Yeah.
A film that he had barely any control over and was taken out of his hands and butchered.
Yeah.
Until it, 25, 30 years later, he had the chance to reconstruct it. An opening which Altman paid homage to in his film about Hollywood. So I was aware. I mean, the Altman came later, after mine. I was aware of the Wells opening.
Yes.
And you don't need to know that a 35mm camera loaded, fully loaded, has got, maybe 8, 9, 10 minutes of, unless you've seen Rope and, the other Hitchcock films where he was using that technique. But there's something about the camera when it doesn't cut, when you don't change the viewpoint. It's like someone's in a room and they are hit over the head and dragged out and thrown into the boot of a car. Now, you can do that through 15 cuts, or you can do it from the point of view of the person who is hit over the head and dragged out and thrown into the boot of the car. Now, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What's going to grab you? What's the way that Paul Joyce is going to shoot that?
Yeah. And this is really interesting because that first couple of minutes of Warrior Escape really grabs you, and it never really lets go.
Exactly. That's what you got to do. And there's one other element of Doctor Who. My son now, who's in his 30s, and did see it very early on. He's now a teacher at Wickham Abbey private school. He watched it, and my granddaughter is now coming up to 9. And she suddenly realizes that I'm famous in a very tiny way, like I got my photograph in Doctor Who magazine. Suddenly the old fool, is kind of, it's granddad's all right. He watched it with her just 2 or 3 nights ago, which is very interesting. And he said, he said, the star was undoubtedly Clifford Rose, who gave a fantastic performance. He said he blew Tom Baker away. Sam, my son, and I probably believe that Tom was the best of them. But he said it was the humor from the beginning. It was the humor, and that the humor was the glue that stitched that story together. And if you look at all the great directors, look at Stanley Kubrick. His greatest film is Dr. Strangelove. In terms of humor.
Yeah. And talking of the great Tom Baker, how did you get on with Tom Baker?
Oh, he was grim. I mean, I loved him as a person, but professionally, it was a nightmare. There was some kind of rehearsal space in Acton, this, huge fucking building, BBC owned. It's Jonathan Miller here and rehearsing Shakespeare and things. All, and it was all like an army barracks, with steel furniture and old polystyrene cups around of tea, half-drunk tea, and that dog ends on the floor and everything, because you could smoke then in those. And so you go in there, and everybody's reluctant. They don't want to read the script anyway. Tom doesn't. And in the corner, there is a BBC stationery cabinet. So you've got to find the key to that first, because Tom wants to get into it. So we managed to open up the stationery cabinet. And there are boxes, things like notepads and so on. And the BBC then bought the cheapest available HB pencils, which came in boxes. They were kind of yellow colour. They obviously, cost a shilling for 25 gross. And Tom would take a box of those out, say, right, sit at the table. And we start reading, say, no, I'm not saying that. And the pencil would go down onto the script, and he'd do that, and the pencil would break because they were very cheap, So by the end of the session, he'd cut 90% of his dialogue, and there were 2 boxes of broken pencils on the floor.
Why did he not want to do his dialogue? Was it because he didn't like it, or was he?
I think I give him the full benefit of the doubt. I think that as a really good actor, and not film, but he would be equally good in film, on television. He was aware that you could do more with an expression than he could with words. And he was used to rather poor words. Well, I thought that Chris Bidmead and I came up with words which weren't necessarily poor words, you know?
Well, I suppose at that point he had been in his character for 6 years, hadn't he? He lived with that character.
So he was about to leave. He knew he was leaving.
So that, you know, and I struggled to prevent him from reducing too much. But there was a trick which I'd learned from an elderly director who'd had a similar experience with another actor. And I brought in a tape recorder to the session and put it on the table. He said, no, he said, what's that? I don't want that. Not recorded. No, I don't want to be recorded. I said, well, Tom, I brought it in because, you know, your contributions are so interesting that I don't want to miss any of it. And from then on, he didn't change a word.
Really? Isn't that interesting? So maybe he just needed a little bit of authority being exerted on him to bring him down a peg, and then he would fly from that point. I mean,
he didn't want it to be recorded so that, you know, you could say to the BBC, look, he's refusing to say the line.
He's being difficult. How did because there was absolutely this struggle, and it sounds like a titanic struggle that you had on the production side. What about on the cast side?
It's smooth as silk. Everyone I wanted.
And were they watching all these arguments over closing the set for 2 hours because of the split level set and
they'd go in a huddle and they'd say, "Oh, Paul's having a bit of a problem there," you know. I think Clifford Rose said, you know, he was bullied. Well, I wasn't bullied, you know. I was threatened.
Well, let's just remind people out there, the cast of Warriors Gate, you mentioned Clifford Rose there. It's an incredible performance that he gives, very contained, very believable, very focused. We've also got Kenneth Cope in the cast, a great character actor who'd come to notoriety on Randall and Hopkirk, deceased, hadn't he, in the late 60s, still acting to this day. There's also David Kincaid in the cast, Freddie Earle, Harry Walters, Vincent Pickering with David Weston. Unrecognisable because he was under all that fur, so he can still...
He was in Roger Corman's The Mask of the Red Death, because I worked for Corman on a film he made here called The Tomb of Ligeia.
Yes.
I've seen it, yeah.
Wonderful film.
Yeah.
So I knew a lot of those people, you know, I'd watched them. Wow. That was the great thing about the Beeb. You could pull in people. I mean, Clifford Rose, I'd watched many in the theatre at the Royal Shakespeare Company. He was in the production by Peter Brook of Marat Sade. And just fantastic theatre in those days, much better than today. And I spotted actors there that I would work with later.
Because Clifford Rose had great success, hadn't he, in a really popular drama show a few years earlier. Had become a household name and face.
Remind me, which one was that?
Wasn't he Kessler in Secret Army?
I think he was. Yes, he was. Yes, he had. But I cast him because of Marat Sade and the work he did at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And what he did was, of course, treat it as an entirely believable script, and that this was a Nazi officer.
Yeah. Yes,
you
he
know,
was
that's what he
was.
That's what he was, you know, and he was unwavering, and not, you know, a little kind of nod to the camera. Well, this is a bit of fun, isn't it?
You're safe with me, really. Yeah.
And that's why my son said he's the star.
I noticed in the story as well that as regards Birok and Laszlo, the Tharrell's characters, that those characters too are complex. That they've got this sort of checkered past where they were oppressive almost and quite violent, and so we see them now as they are in this reduced quality as slaves, being treated as a commodity but by, as you say, by this intergalactic Nazi. It shows the complexities, the shades of grey.
When you're talking about layering with characters, you can convey a lot with a little. Very often, you just need hints here and there and so on. And so, Chris and I tried to get that in.
They're very threatening. They're a very threatening presence, the Tharals. You're always very uncertain of them, and I think that again is down to the way that you approach the story in this visual way. It's so unsettling. We only ever really feel safe when we're with either the Doctor or Romana, and that's quite unique for Doctor Who. There's usually another sort of wall of warmth there, which I think that we get. I think we do get that in this, but we get it from something else. I think we get it somehow, probably from you, from the way that you take us through the story, the way you lead us through that multi-level set that's kind of unlike anything we've ever seen on the show before. The way that you hit those visual beats that again are quite unlike anything we've ever seen, but still feel that we can reach out and touch them.
I think you should write the review. Very good, yeah. Write that out. That's excellent, yes. Well beyond what I thought, yes.
But what struck me though, to hear you speaking about this, Paul, and your creative process, you've still, the way you talk about this, and this happened several decades ago, and yet I get the impression from you that you viewed the entire period and this job, because this is a job of work, that you viewed it as an opportunity to release something, to connect with something, to communicate something, and to experiment within reason. Whereas Simon and myself, we've probably read and watched a lot of interviews with people who've directed a lot of Doctor Who, but directors generally, because we follow popular culture and entertainment. And something we hear a lot about the BBC is all about confinement, all about restriction. And I know that you did feel that, but immediately it seems like you went in there on a ground level and kind of carpet bombed this production with creativity and saw it as the things that other people saw as barriers. You either not completely dismissed them, but kind of just stepped really confidently over them. I think Simon used the word bravura earlier on. I can't think of anything better than that, and it's almost a fearlessness that you seem to have that may have got people's backs up. I don't know.
Oh, it did. Yeah, I mean, if there was fearlessness, it is because you can see that if you proceed in a certain way, you're going to get a terrific result. Now, remember that I've said that I think that Warrior's Gate is about 32 or 33% effective over what I wanted.
Which makes my brain fizz to think, okay, if you'd actually achieved...
imagine if they said, okay, Paul, we can see you need that extra week, which you missed.
Yeah.
Okay, the set has been condemned, but actually we've double checked it and it's fine. So you will have your 3 days back. Now, you wanted some, if I'd had that rather than, what the fuck are you doing? Do you realize it's 5:30?
Well,
I mean, that's the mentality. You can't shoot. You're shooting off the set. You can't do that. No.
I find
everybody out.
And the frustrating thing with all of this for you must have been, for example, with the split level set, which, from what we understand, the lighting chief had that, the lighting crew had that condemned as unsafe.
Yeah.
And you had the set closed for a while. Now,
2 days.
That's not your fault at all. You were not responsible for putting that set together, and yet you were the one who was ultimately losing 2 hours of your time at that point.
Well, they would say that. They would say, well, why has he built a set, that's on 2 levels? Why has he built it? It's built in steel. Well, talk to the designer, I mean, that's the in-house designer. What's the problem? Make sure it's safe. I wanted, because we're going up and down, we're going to have a lightweight camera. It's going to give me all sorts of opportunities. And getting back, and just returning for a second, don't want to interrupt the flow, but to the camera script. the whole point about, when you're dealing with those kind of unknowns, really, until you're actually, you can be there with your coffee cups and your stationery cabinets and all that. When you're on the set with a lightweight camera,
yeah,
and there's Romana there, and there's, and someone's coming with, it's a whole different set of circumstances then.
So you wanted to work much more organically than from a piece of paper. That's what it boils down to, isn't it?
Yeah, and I had some fun. There's one scene outside the white space where there's an argument between Kincaid and the camera moves around, and
yes,
it's about a 3-minute sequence. I remember Nathan Turner couldn't believe it. We got it in the first take, like 2.5, 3 minutes.
Because on the one hand, you were being criticised for being too, I think John Dean, the technical manager, actually described you as being self-indulgent and incompetent.
Interesting combination that, isn't it? Yes. Was I incompetent in my self-indulgence?
But then on the other hand,
yes. I remember when I did a program for Melvin Bragg on the South Bank show. I did a film about Nick Rogue, which he refused to transmit.
Right.
He said this documentary is Marxist and elitist. And I said, fuck me, Melvin, that's pretty good. Yeah, that's what I was aiming for.
You are somewhat of a frustrated filmmaker, or an artist, a frustrated artist throughout your life. By the sounds of it, sounds like you.
Absolutely, yeah. But they don't let me out the cage. That's the trouble.
But the thing is, isn't it true that it's those daring people who dare to push the envelope and dare to go for broke? Those are the ones we need, because it's the safe ones that are not interesting, and that's one of the reasons why Warriors Gate still stands up there. And it's remarkable that you only directed 4 episodes, one story of Doctor Who, and yet everybody still within Doctor Who world knows your name, and everybody still talks about Warriors Gate.
Well, that's great. But remember, the reason why is the reason why I went in.
Yes.
It was to say it is possible.
Yeah.
No, it's not. Fuck off.
Fuck off.
No, it's not. No. Graham, come in. Yes, we've got a script for you. It's about tourism. It's about, and 40 years on, with the reason we're doing this interview is precisely that.
Yeah.
That enough that 32 or 33% of what I wanted stuck to the point that you recognize it, a whole new generation recognizes it. I'm dust, I'm gone, I'm too old to direct it now. But I would have loved the opportunity. But they wouldn't want me in. Russell T Davies wouldn't want me in because he's writing them. He's saying, I'm writing this. I say, well, Russell, it's a terrific, draft, but maybe I don't want that. I don't want to be challenged. Challenge the system. If you come in as a director to television, you're challenging what a system which has been in place for 50 years, which is the writer-producer axis. That's it. And directors are just, like cameraman or, whatever they call them, lighting technician.
And you blurred that, didn't you? Because you came in and you wrote whatever proportion of the script you wrote it, and that is acknowledged by Chris Bigmead. I'm assuming it's probably on the paperwork, because I think I'm right in saying that you were paid for the rewrite, weren't you? But not credited.
They reluctantly paid me for the rewrite, but they didn't give me a screen credit.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I have recently listened to the Stephen Gallagher, the new novelisation that Stephen Gallagher has done from his original script, and it's interesting.
That's just come out this year, hasn't it, Simon, on BBC Audio?
It's an audio. That's right. It's an audio reading by John Culshaw.
You see, he can't let it go But
No.
when the first novelization of the book that he attempted, they turned it down because they said it wasn't like the TV show.
But what's interesting for me, you see, is that, and because I now, from what I understand, that new novelization is written from Stephen Gallagher's script. The things that I love about the show are not in the novelization. And
Well,
so
that's why they
makes me
didn't
like,
accept his first version of it.
That's Paul Joyce. That's Paul Joyce. Because, for example, I find it incredible that that sequence of Romana being threatened by the unseen Thariel at the end of episode 2, it's not in the book. It's not. It's gone. But the most significant scene for me in the entire production of Warriors Gate is the banqueting scene, the cliffhanger to episode 3.
Absolutely.
Not in the book. It's gone. It's out. Episode 3 cliffhanger doesn't exist anymore. And that beautiful, beautiful banqueting scene with the axe coming down and the cobwebs suddenly appearing.
That's the moment.
It's gone. It's not there. And that, to me, is the key scene in Warriors Gate. And as a child, I remember just my mind just being blown by that.
Well, what you're talking about visual devices to describe indescribable things.
Yes.
The passing of time, the interruption of memory, the stirring of emotions, which can lead to some kind of hallucination or a vision that isn't shared by everybody. All those things are to do with visual storytelling. You know, John Nathan Turner didn't understand any of that.
For me personally, I've always thought that Warriors Gate is very much the 2001 The Space Odyssey of Doctor Who, because again, as a child, I didn't understand 2001, but it connected with me on an aesthetic level.
And you return to it over and over and over again, don't you? And get something different from it,
and it becomes a work of art in its own right, and so you can connect on different levels with something, and that's what I got from Warriors Gate, was that visual connection with it, that something was intriguing me about it. It was like an itch that wouldn't go away, that it just lodged in your brain. Does it bother you at all, Paul, that people still struggle to understand Warriors Gate? Is that important? Do they need to understand it, or can they appreciate it without understanding it?
Well, I struggle to understand it as well, frankly.
You wrote it.
but that's the great thing. Leave it leave it multi-layered and ambiguous, so you can, for example, if you read the work of Ernest Hemingway when you're 20 and 40 and 60, Across the River and Into the Trees seems like a masterpiece, the work of a fumbling adolescent, and a triumph over 3 different different of your life. And that's true of great writing, and I think it's true of great filmmaking. Whether it's true of Warriors Gate or not, I wouldn't be the one to judge, but that's what I was aiming for. Something which would be, in a sense, timeless.
Well, I think in that respect, it absolutely was. I think from that, if that's what you were trying to achieve, I think you did achieve it, because certainly it is timeless. But secondly, you're right in that I now look at it across the different generations. I look at it in a different light. And so, as a child, I was just I was a little bit entranced and intoxicated by this weird imagery that I didn't necessarily understand, but I related to. Now, as an adult, I'm able to look at it and I absolutely admire it as a piece of artwork. So do you almost then still get irritated that people in that case complain and say, "Oh, I don't understand Warriors Gate, so I don't get it, so I'm not interested in it"?
The balance of the enthusiasts to the detractors has worked massively in favour of the enthusiasts as time has gone on.
Yeah.
And the ones who say I don't understand it, I simply don't deal. What am I going to say to them? Well, go back to school.
Would you feel the need to try to explain the story to them, or is it a case of no? If you don't get it, you don't get it.
No. I wouldn't try and explain the story. I think that you would do a disservice to the story and to the characters, because you would indicate only one route through it.
And do you think that could be also that not silence on your part, but that understanding, that unspoken understanding between yourself and the audience member could be what challenges them if they don't understand it on the first watch, or even the fifth watch, or even on the 12th watch. They will continue to go back to it and try and unlock it, decode it.
Well, that's fine. I can't imagine watching it 12 times without really understanding it. I think that might be a bit tricky,
I still struggle to understand it. I've seen it numerous times. That's far more than 12
Sometimes
times.
I think I've got it. I think I've got it all nailed down. I've got it kettled. I know where it sits in my head. I know what it's all about. And then somebody, Simon or one of our other co-hosts on the show, will ask me to explain it, and I'll go, "Well, it's about it's sort of this happens, and it's about
like
that."
Smoke, isn't it? It's like smoke. You can see, so you can almost grasp it, but then it's gone. And
I think I've got it nailed down, and then I make an abject fool of myself. Two of the Doctor's co-stars left the TARDIS in Warrior's Gate. Both were much publicised departures. Was the enormity of that apparent to you at the time? Because the children were bereft at the loss of K9, and Lalla Ward's Romana had proven immensely popular too, due to her kind of otherworldly characterisation, I suppose, that was balanced really perfectly, I felt, in Warrior's Gate in particular. But little moments like that happen in such a long-running show with such a deep connection with the audience, was that just sort of taking care of business to you, inconsequential?
Well, there was the imminent departure, of course, of Tom Baker. So, you had this feeling of closure. To be honest, I thought that the loss of K9 and Romana was detrimental to the show ultimately. And John, the wonderful actor who played the K9, he was one of my greatest supporters on. I mean, the voice of K9.
Yeah,
he was always on the set. Lovely guy. He was very, very bright guy. He could see exactly what he said. I can see what you're going through. He was very much on my side. Whereas Lalla really wasn't, and Tom didn't really care. It would have been lovely to say to Tom, and we drank together and so on, but, and got on superficially. But to say to him, look, this is what I want to try and do with Warrior's Gate. About halfway through, when I came back with the black and white photographs of Paris Castle, he suddenly thought, this guy's serious,
Because I'm right, aren't I? I'm thinking that Tom, that was the point at which Tom complimented you and said, yeah, the sequences of the combination of the live action with the black and white, he approved of that, didn't he?
Well, that's because it was right in his face. But I mean, he had plenty of opportunities with the different versions of the script and conversations, and if he'd been interested, he just fucked off. I mean. Yeah. Leaving me to have the conversations with I was always in favor of not group decisions, but group acknowledgement of what was happening. One thing I really compliment that was given to me on Doctor Who was that I was a great communicator. I think Matt Irvin said that, and I was the only director to attend special effects sessions. Can you imagine Stanley Kubrick saying, and just get it spinning round, will you? And then we'll and there'll be a bit of music, and I'll see you tomorrow. Because I was there, and Matt knew I was there, and everybody, they got it right. They did it very well,
And I know Matt has talked a lot about the fact that he was surprised and very complimentary of the fact that you were there. Whereas to you, of course you were going to be there. Why would you not be there? Whereas clearly...
miss it? No, of course not. No.
And this is where you very much clearly come from an auteur sensibility, that you want to be overseeing the entire... I mean, you took... I'm right in thinking that you took the photos at Paris Castle, didn't you?
Yeah. I found the negatives at last. Those are all the negatives. There are 20 of them in there, and they're in... You see, they're in their own bag.
We can, yeah.
That's phenomenal.
For those of you who can't see, Paul's holding them up for us now on the screen.
There are 20 in there.
So to involve those photographs and that whole environment of Paris Castle, was that completely from you Paul? Had you been there before? This was a location you were familiar with, and you knew instinctively that this was right for
No,
Paul?
I just did research and realised that was the most interesting garden and statuary.
So you must have been writing that material in, knowing you couldn't go on location. Did you already have in your brain how you were going to shoot this? Were you writing the script with this in mind?
I must confess, I can't recall, chicken or egg, whether I came up with that because of Powis Castle or because I then thought, oh, well, yes. Powis Castle is going to... I simply don't remember that. But at the point that I realised that one way of creating this extraordinary or hopefully extraordinary world or universe would be to combine black and white and color so that you've got a feeling of the past and the present, collapsing in onto one another. Yeah. That was something that, sort of naturally evolved out of the story we were telling.
Sure. And of course, the other interesting thing that had never really happened on Doctor Who before was you commissioning concept art, because you were the one that commissioned the painting of the gateway from D.H. Smith, and that had never been done before. And I guess the feeling on that was, why is Paul asking, why are we doing this?
Well, that's become a famous image. It's on everything.
Do you know where the original is, out of interest?
I was offered it about 10 years ago, and I turned it down. So
Paul!
Some fan had it. It went into the BBC archive. And then I think someone stole it, and then it went onto the black market, and then it was offered to me, and then I don't know where it is now.
It's such an iconic image, and this again is the thing with Warrior's Gate. It's literally, we've talked about them, but it's the coin, it's the banqueting scene, it's the axe, it's the gateway. It's full of iconic, standout iconic images that burrow into your brain.
But remember, Simon, that this was meant to be a low budget production in a white set. This is a cheap show, We'll just knock it off and, come on, quick, get on to the next one, get rid of Romana, then we move on. And so out of this kind of white fog, I had to create hopefully memorable images. Within the nature of the material, there was very little there. It all had to be creative.
This is why it doesn't actually worry me personally that I've never actually understood it fully, because that's not what it's about for me. It is this romantic image of the gateway with the mirrors in, and where does it go to? I don't know. Does it matter that I don't know? No, it doesn't. It's the world. It's, we're going down a filmic route for a second. It's the mise en scène, isn't it, Paul, of this world that you created. And that's what Warrior's Gate is, and that's why it still remains to me a unique Doctor Who story. It is. There's nothing like it.
Well, it's great to hear.
You must be proud of it.
Yeah. Well, of course. I mean, it's the albatross, isn't it, around my neck? People say, "What was the highlight of your career?" Doctor Who. What was the low point of your career? Doctor Who.
Is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing?
Well, it's good now because we're chatting away and enjoying each other's company. Yeah, so, and a lot of people have seen it on hopefully on Blu-ray. I think the sadness of it is that nobody, either 6 months later, a year later, a decade later, 4 decades later, so, I'm still here. The phone don't ring.
And the phone don't ring. I find that so frustrating. Do you feel that it was something of a horrendous experience that now that you almost wish hadn't happened, or are you pleased it's happened, or? Well,
if it hadn't happened, I'd be sitting here rather alone, looking at a half-finished painting, wouldn't I? Well, thinking, why doesn't the phone ring?
Viewing figures.
I'd much prefer to be talking to you lads, than sitting here wondering if the kidneys can take another coffee.
The viewing figures for Warrior's Gate, they ranged between 7 and 8.5 million. They went up as the story progressed.
That's great. I thought they'd go down when people say, "What the fuck's going on?" I
don't
understand a word.
People like being challenged. People like being challenged after all, Paul. Who knew?
That's great. That's not bad figures, really.
Not at all. And as Simon mentioned earlier on, there are 2 CDs, in fact, released recently from the BBC, that new updated audiobook, and Stephen Gallagher's own direct sequel, which is called The Ring of Kairos, which it picks up the story with Romana, Laszlo, and K9 remaining in E-space. But have you ever given any thought, Paul, about where you would take the story next? When we leave, when there's a parting of those ways between the Doctor and Adric and Romana and K9, have you ever given any thought to what happened afterwards?
No, but it would have been very nice for them to say, at that point, of course, it would have been difficult because Gallagher's had the original idea. So then you'd have to go back to Gallagher. And Gallagher's always had a problem with what we did, as we always had a problem with what he did, because it didn't work, But the fact that he's scratching away at this saw of Warrior's Gate, Gallagher, back and forth. I don't give a monkeys. I'm just unhappy that I didn't get more work out of it. He's trying to prove that his concept for it is the one that ultimately is going to be judged. It's not. It's what we're talking about, the Blu-ray, the thing. He should be grateful and happy that his contribution was considerable in that, and not struggle on to prove that it was all his work, or that his revised version of it is going to be the classic text. And as I say, the publishers, as far as I understand it, were not happy with his first novelization because it didn't stick to the exciting moments of the TV show.
I think it was John Nathan Turner stepped in and put a stop to that and said, no, it's got to follow the television serial.
Well, that's very nice of him, considering he didn't understand a word of it.
How did you get on with sort of John Nathan Turner and Barry Letts as well? Come to that.
Oh, Barry Letts. He would sit there, he'd look like a fucking accountant, Well, Paul, we seem to be encountering certain problems. So I said, I'm the future and you're the fucking past. Thus ended my career at BBC.
But it's interesting because actually, in all honesty, you were correct in that what you were trying to do on Warrior's Gate, you were doing that filmic style, you were trying to do more of a single camera approach, etc., etc. That is exactly, you were trying to do film on television, and that ultimately is what's happened with television. It has gone down the filmic route. So actually, you were correct. You maybe could have put it a little more politely to Barry Letts, but in effect, he represented the old the studio system, and you represented.
Maybe I'm being too hard on Barry Letts. He was a representative of everything that I was trying to kick against.
It's definitely your tenacity throughout your career that has kind of held you in good stead, and it's
bad,
But do you feel a little bit like you were, maybe throughout your entire career, I don't know, certainly in Warrior's Gate, do you feel you were sort of misunderstood, that they just didn't quite get what you were trying to do? And do you feel a little bit like maybe you were sort of hung out to dry?
Oh yeah, all those things. Yes. If Bidmead had been the producer on that, it would have been great,
You got on well.
Of course, if he'd been producing it, then we couldn't have sat down and done the writing. So that's what you wanted. Somebody, we understood immediately what we were doing. He was the only, and Matt too, and the designer, Graham, the costume designer, the lovely lady. I got that team together and they were very good.
Yes.
It would have been wonderful to have a real great lighting designer, a cameraman. In those days, you were in a studio and you had lights up here and he'd just point the lights down. To light for a close-up, you just, it was the general light and you moved the camera closer. There was no modeling. There was no painting with light, the great book that John Alton wrote about.
Yes.
How to create, he did all the wonderful film noirs of the 40s. Those are the things that I grew up with.
do you wish, in hindsight, you had gone for a less ambitious approach, or are you pleased and proud of the fact that you actually went for broke on it and only got 30%?
If I'd opted for a less ambitious approach, we wouldn't be talking now.
Mm-hmm.
It would just have been another show. Although I'm not sure how it would have emerged, because there were no scripts for it, basically. Would have been a fucking mess. Yes, but all the brickbats, so all the disadvantages from going that way, haunted me for the rest of my career.
How did you feel? Because I'm assuming that you were to an extent persona non grata at the BBC at that point, and were not going to be employed again. How did you end up? It must have been a bruising experience for you.
I moved into photography and did other things at that point, and then documentaries. And my great frustration was not in doing more top end drama, really, because I think that my skills were in working with actors and casting and visually and so on. I did a 90-minute film about Chris Christopherson, and when Sam Peckinpah died, Chris said basically that Hollywood in the last decade of Sam's life just ignored him, that they denied him what was essential for his creative pulse to continue to beat. And I felt the same way for 30 years, that somehow whatever establishment it is that you have to pay attention to in order to get work have ignored me.
And it's funny, isn't it, that on the one hand, although it must have been a bruising experience for you, you're still happy to sit here and talk with us about it, even though it must have been painful for you.
Well, I remember it very well, while I can still remember it. While I can still remember it, it's a moment to talk to such as yourselves, because I'm happy to share that. I doubt if anyone will go through that experience, because you can't replicate how the BBC was then.
No,
those are the circumstances that I encountered at that time. Now there might be a quite different story.
I think it would be different. I think, ironically,
I've watched the episodes when there are many Doctor Who's, and John Hurt's been in there doing his terrible old man act, rubbish. You think, Christ, give me those facilities.
Yeah.
Give me those actors. Give me those special effects, and give me a hand in the story, and I'll do it again.
Just to remind you out there that A Life Behind the Lens is a full retrospective of the career of Paul Joyce, and that runs up until the 10th of November at the gallery at Winchester Discovery Centre in Hampshire. This sounds like it's a real opening up of a massive body of your work.
Yeah, the 120, I think, framed pieces there.
You've got a magnificent book out that accompanies the A Life Behind the Lens exhibition. The names in this book that people you've worked with: Spike Milligan, James Cagney, Billy Wilder, Eartha Kitt, Jeff Bridges, Dirk Bogarde, Quentin Tarantino, Harry Dean Stanton, Martin Sheen. These are huge. Bryan Singer, Arthur C. Clarke, Dennis Hopper. The list goes on and on and on.
How's it going to feel when you walk in there and see it all laid out across the walls? I mean, all the famous faces that you've photographed, and these stunning paintings. You really are a creative all-rounder, aren't you? Who continues to get so much nourishment and stimulation just out of getting it all out there.
I've taken photographs of the great and the good and famous. I've painted vernacular Los Angeles architecture that appealed very much to Dennis Hopper, who got me a show in Santa Monica 13 years ago. I've done Venice. I've got a whole Stonehenge exhibition of photographs that William Boyd say make you see a familiar landscape through new eyes. I've written and adapted plays which are in text form, which have never been performed, and the phone doesn't ring. and no gallery will represent me, and I don't have an agent. I wonder about that, because it seems to me that those pictures would be liked by quite a lot of people. I was born during the war in Winchester, and I remember quite a lot of the war. And in 1944, my mother, heavily pregnant with me, was chased across a field near Whitchurch by a Messerschmitt that tried to kill her with machine gun fire. That's what I saw.
That's
a German fighter downed in a cornfield.
And so you've painted that from your memory.
Yep.
And certainly the book, I mean, I've been looking through the book, as I say, that accompanies the exhibition, and it's a stunning piece of work with incredible photography. You've done a fantastic commentary to go with all this as well, some brilliant essays in there. It's, what is it, 250 pages, this book. It's a fantastic piece of work. I'm right in thinking that people can get hold of copies of this book, can't they? And again, we're going to put the links in for people to be able to
it's available. It's a special order book, and it's in hardback and paperback.
Paul, we can't thank you enough for spending this time with us today, and congratulations on this retrospective event, and our gratitude for your work on Warriors Gate all those years ago.
Well, of course, there are mixed emotions about what was basically a horrendous experience. But I realized, you know, in talking to you, that enough has survived of what I wanted, like the opening shots and, you know, the spinning coins. But as I said, it's 30% of what I really was trying to achieve. So I think yes, there is a frustration that those, if you call them qualities, were not acknowledged within the profession, which allowed me, you know, because I was relatively inexperienced in television at that point, you know, when it wasn't like I'd had a whole career doing it. You know, this was my experiment with a medium that I was coming to terms with. But it stopped there. It didn't go on to become, you know, something which developed my career or my abilities as a director within television. And I went back to film. I did, you know, Summer Lightning with Tom Bell and David Warner and Paul Schofield, and but that was not recognised either, you know.
Because of the ideas that you brought to Warriors Gate, the style that you wanted to make it in, and not just Warriors Gate, other stuff that you've done as well. And as I say, ultimately time has proven that what you were trying to do, certainly undoubtedly on Warriors Gate, is what we have now ended up with television production. I think you probably were ahead of your time, and I think you, if nothing else, again, you can be proud of that fact, that you were doing something that ultimately has become, that's what we now do. That's how television production is.
What I think was, if you like, unique about the Warriors Gate experience was that you were dealing with a show where the unexpected was the norm within the format of the programme.
Within Doctor Who circles, Graham Harper is always held up as on the case of Androzani as being the first time a true kind of director that broke out of the mould came into Doctor Who, and I've always railed against that. I've always said no. It happened in season 18. It was Love at Bickford on the Leisure Hive,
yeah,
and it was yourself on Warriors Gate. And it was me as an 11-year-old watching the Leisure Hive and Warriors Gate that inspired me to want to become a director. And I did. So if nothing else, you know, I personally have a debt of thanks to you that it was watching Warriors Gate that inspired me to want to direct, because I didn't know what a director did at that point, but I was like, I want to do that. Whatever that is, I want to do that.
Well, that's very kind of you. And frankly, you know, one wants to be generous about it, and, you know, with yourselves too, to say, well, if something transmitted to you, which went on to produce, and you went on to produce creative work as a result of that, then I can only be very, very happy about that. You know, that's like passing on the baton in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Graham, I've always thought of as a very talented director,
He's
but not an
fantastic.
auteur. You know,
He's
I mean,
brilliant.
he's a very talented director, and that's why he's employed, and I'm not. You know that.
You're as talented as him, Paul. You are as talented as Graham Harper.
Yeah, but
you are officially.
Possibly so, but in a different context, and in a different manner and in a different way, and as perceived by people like Barry Letts and his now equivalent. You know, the Barry Lettses keep going. I was quite wrong. You know, he's the future and I'm the past, basically, because Barry Letts or someone like him is always going to be there. And if they're not in the front office, you know, dealing with the creative talents, then they will be the financiers or the insurance. You know, they will always be there, pulling the purse string. It's all about the money. There's a great line in Body and Soul, film noir, which I wish I'd written. It's all addition and subtraction. The rest is just conversation.
That seems a perfect note on which to leave our conversation now.
That's wonderful stuff. Thank you so much for this, Paul. Sincerely, it's been a thrill to meet you.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's fascinating conversation. I said to Simon before, I have no idea where this is going to go, and boy, was I.
A bit like Warriors Gate.
Yeah. What a privilege, Simon, to spend a couple of hours talking with Paul. There's such a generous and entertaining man, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think that's the word, entertaining, and it's something that I hadn't necessarily expected to find from Paul, because of all that we know about Warriors Gate and the troubled production history that it had. It's difficult to know what kind of a person Paul is going to be, because he's not somebody like, let's say, Terence Dix, that we know lots about. We've seen lots of interviews with him. Paul is a much more ambiguous character to fans to actually get under the skin of. And so I was actually surprised what a warm and interesting and, as you say, entertaining person he was. And also the thing that really still surprises me but delights me is that he's as enthusiastic to talk about Warriors Gate as he is, because clearly it was a really traumatic experience for him. And I think anybody else would be quite excused from just saying, you know what, I really don't want to talk about that. That was a bad experience in my life, and I don't want to talk about it. And yet he really enjoys talking about it. And also, the other thing that amazes me is his recollection. He can remember so much of this. He's so clear. He's so precise. He knows exactly what happened when it happened. He's clearly got a very good memory of these events. And so you come away. It's one of those things, Warriors Gate, the production of it has always intrigued me as to quite what the truth of it is. And so I now feel I've got a much better understanding of what went on in those studio walls and how problematic and traumatic and difficult it was. And that was gold for me.
I suppose it's the nearest that we'll ever get to being there on the studio floor and in the gallery and all those places, you know, for that kind of insight and knowledge of a time in television where the making of all this content now, you know, we live in the streaming age now, where so much of it is made. It's such a volume of material, and the BBC have got, you know, much more facilities. Just the BBC alone, all over the country, television is made differently now. But I suppose the principle is largely the same, isn't it? And the creative process, I suppose, that may have altered. I suppose there are still frustrations, there are still pitfalls, and as well as triumphs. But I think that's going to prove to be an interesting conversation for people out there who are not just interested in the history of television, but interested in a career in television in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm. And I think it is a fair point that Paul was ahead of his time.
Very much so.
He is clearly a visionary. I mean, nobody could deny that. He is a visionary. with a very individual artistic style within him. And I think, as I say, it's fair to say he was ahead of his time, because the kind of television that he was trying to make with Warrior's Gate, people were not doing at that time, but people are doing now. That's more how television has gone now. So actually, my feeling is, if anything, he was right in what he was trying to do, and Barry Letts was actually the old school, the old guard, and Paul was pushing for what would ultimately become the way television is made today.
And I suppose that conflict is a tale as old as time in itself, isn't it?
Yes, of course it is, because you look through any television or film history, and there are visionaries. Stanley Kubrick is another example, ahead of their time. And I think Stanley Kubrick actually is a very good comparison with Paul Joyce. Paul Joyce would never ever be he would never be the kind of person that would accept that, I'm sure. I think he's too humble a person to do that. But actually, in television terms, he had a similar kind of ethos, I think, working style, as Kubrick did. The difference is, of course, Kubrick had millions of pounds at his disposal and studios falling at his feet to say, yes, Stanley. Whereas for Paul, it was a very different experience. He was working against a very archaic BBC system that was very much locked in the past. And I suppose in a way it was kind of on that cusp, because in those early 80s, television production was just in the process of moving from that very, very dated, archaic old style into what we now have today. And so in that respect, as I say, Paul was out of his time in many ways.
Things were creeping forward, yes, and from being ahead of one's time to running out of time, because that is the old girl. She's starting up and calling time on this edition of Type 40, everybody. But I'll be back soon with another podcast. Look out for that wherever you found this. It could have been over on the dedicated home feed for Type 40, type40.podbean.com, or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Google Play, Podbay, the Podbean app itself. Everywhere. We're also on YouTube, of course, the world's largest streaming platform, on the Spacebook's YouTube channel. And we're still on the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network's very own master feed. As if we could ever, ever, ever leave. That's loaded with so many treats for your ears daily. Maybe you'd like to get in touch and have your say. You can reach out to us through our social media, Instagram and Twitter at Type40Doctor or you can email us, type40doctorwho@gmail.com. And if you're feeling very, very brave enough that you could step through a charged vacuum emboitment even, you can find us over in the Type 40 Facebook group. That's been going for 5 years now, and full of fans of all generations from all corners of the Whoniverse. Yes, you know who you are. They're talking and they're commenting and sometimes arguing on a daily basis over in the Type 40 Facebook group. Real time, extra-dimensional chit-chat for you there. Simon, where can people find you on social media?
They can always come and find me on Facebook. That's where I spend my time. Don't do Twitter or Instagram or any of those newfangled things. I'm a bit last century. So come and find me on Facebook, where you will find me under the Whonatics. If you look at the Whonatics, WHONATICS, on Facebook, and you'll find me there as the admin.
Wonderful stuff. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram as the Spacebook, where I am wheezing and groaning, posting, sharing, sometimes ranting, but mostly raving about all pop culture inside and outside of the TARDIS. But yeah, we always have the time, if you have the space, here at Type 40 and whichever side of that CVE that you decide that you're staying on. Safe trip. Speak soon. Bye-bye.